think. Good morning or afternoon to everyone who has tuned in, and welcome to the 12th and last EPRC webinar of this academic year. My name is Wilbert den Hoed, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at EPRC in Delft. And it's a real pleasure to host this seminar today and have Dr. Diana Morales with us. Diana and I coincided at Newcastle University a couple of years ago, where she did a very interesting study on regional cooperation and development in Colombia and Chile. Today, we are very delighted to welcome her to be sharing the findings of her newest research on the topic of green policies for the green transformation in sparsely populated regions of Europe. In normal circumstances, these seminars would have taken place face-to-face at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, which we look forward to doing again in the future. Nonetheless, we are delighted to be able to welcome speaker and audience based in different countries in this webinar today. Just a few house rules. I'm sure you will be familiar with most of them now. I would like to inform that this meeting is being recorded, which means that you and your colleagues will have the opportunity to follow the meeting at a later stage. The recording will be made available on our YouTube channel and shared with you by email. We would also like to encourage you to use Twitter to share your thoughts on the webinar and spread the word on the research that Diana will present. And during the next hour, just a reminder to keep your microphone on mute when you're not speaking. And you're free to use the comment box in the chat. Diana's presentation will be about 30 minutes. And in the remaining time, we will open the floor for questions and comments from the audience. During the Q&A, please use the raise a hand function and turn on your camera if you would like to make an intervention. Or again, use the chat function and we'll make sure that your question reaches the speaker. So let me present today's speaker. Diana Morales has a PhD in economic geography from Karlstad Newcastle University in the UK. She finished a postdoctoral position recently at the Center for Sustainable Societal Transformations at Karlstad University in Sweden. And her area of research is regional sustainable transformations, local development, and diverse economies. So I now give the floor to Diana, and you can share your slides now.
Thanks, Wilbert. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to share my screen, and I trust you can see it well by now. Yes, thanks for the introduction. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, Wilbur, and thanks to you and to Liliana and everyone at the EPCR for organizing the seminar. I really hope you find it interesting. And yeah, I'll do my best to keep you interested in that. So yeah, as we were saying, I just finished a postdoc research position at Karlstad University, where I was investigating what are the geographical processes of transformation towards a forest-based bioeconomy in Europe. I'm going to explain that with forest-based bioeconomy in a minute. In that project, as a whole, we were looking at different European regions. We were looking at Värmland here in Sweden, which is where I live, Lapland, which is north of Finland, and we were looking also some places in Spain. But at the end, we have decided, and I have decided in this presentation, to focus on sparsely populated areas or regions because the forest-based bioeconomy poses a quite peculiar role for these areas. It tends to see it as areas that are going to provide the biomass, but also going to contain all the industrial and technological development that is going to be needed. So that's why the focus. One caveat, I guess, about the regions I'm going to talk about, we call them sparsely populated regions because they literally are. They have a very low population density, but they are quite atypical in the sense that they have quite high innovation capabilities and institutional capabilities, which is something that it's not what is normally associated with sparsely populated regions as they're normally defined, which makes them, yeah, as I said, a little bit atypical. difficult, but also quite interesting to explore beyond institutional capacities, what else is happening in the green transformations. So, yeah, I'm going to start by trying to briefly explain the key concepts I'm using for the arguments I'm going to make. Then I'm going to pass to explain a little bit the cases of Lapland and Värmland, and then I'm going to expose two arguments. One that it's contained in a paper that I write with my friend Laura Sariego, but she can't be here because she lives in Costa Rica and it's like 4 a.m. in the morning for her, but I trust she will say this later. So we raised an argument about public sector innovation in the green transformation, and that will be the first part of the argument. The other part of the argument, it will be contained in the paper that I'm writing with the principal investigator, whose name is Margareta Dahlström, and we're talking about green path renewal. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later as well. So I start with the bioeconomy and the forest-based bioeconomy. And this, there are like so many different ways of defining what this means. So people may refer to it as biotechnology. Some other people will talk about it in terms of agriculture, in terms of farming, in terms of fishing. But I'm going to adhere to a concept that sees the bioeconomy as a policy field, and as a policy field that is proposing a technological and economic transformation where biomass is used to replace fossil fuels. It is called a forest-based bioeconomy, well, simply because it relies on forest biomass. There is a blue bioeconomy, for example, that relies on oceans and the materials from the ocean, and etc. So yeah, this forest-based bioeconomy, it emerged from the green growth discourses. It is backed up by supranational organizations like the OECD and the European Union, and it has quite a growing influence at the national and regional level. The bioeconomy, however, is quite heavily criticized because it has a rather simplistic approach to sustainability. It kind of assumes that it will create jobs automatically. It focuses too much on firms and industrial modernization and overlooking some other actors like civil society organizations, conservation groups, citizens, and consumers. So that will be the first key concept. The second is a smart specialization, and smart specialization because it has become kind of the tool of choice, so to speak, to apply the bioeconomy. So smart specialization is a strategy for regional development and regional innovation that focuses on regional priorities, needs and assets, place-based innovation, collaboration between what is called the triple helix actors, but also with ambitions to include the civil society. Smart specialization, what it does is it encourages regions to invest in science, in technology, to mobilize resources and local assets in areas where the regions have strengths or potentials for diversification. And another concept that comes attached very closely to both the forest bioeconomy and smart specialization is innovation. So innovation in this context is almost like the cornerstone of the bioeconomy. And it's often understood as quite, normally understood as the process by which a product or a service is renewed or is brought up to date, or it applies a new process, new techniques, or new ideas, or the creation of new value. But for green transformations, it also means innovation from social innovation and innovation from the public sector, which is what I'm going to talk a little bit more later. And then the other concepts that help me to frame the arguments a little bit better. So this is not actually one concept. This is many green policies, green growth, sustainable transformations. They're all quite different in what they refer to. They're also quite contested, especially when one uses the word green. Sorry. It could be taken as greenwashing. It could be taken just as another way to do things business as usual, just a little bit cleaner, etc. And although this is a very interesting discussion, and we can come back to it later if you want, for the sake of the presentation and of clarity of the analysis, We look at green policies as the policy that focuses on green growth that tries to promote an economic transformation in the region, which means in the forest-based bioeconomy, it means the geographical process of renewal and diversification of an industry, in this case the forest industry, with controversial sustainable credentials. Yeah, I know this could be a rather simplistic definition for all of this, but we can, as I said, we can go back to it later. Now, the concepts of institutional thickness and critical renewals are the main concepts I'm using to frame the argument. So institutional thickness, for a start, it refers to the localized conditions that allow innovation and economic transformation. And it refers to 4 different conditions that are needed for this transformation or development. First, a strong organizational presence, which means there's a number and diversity of organizations that have an interest in the region, say the universities, firms, unions, government agencies, etc. Second factor or condition are high levels of interactions, which this might involve formal and informal agreements, cooperation, knowledge exchange between all these different actors. Third, there's a structure of domination that refers to how the power relations are kind of distributed amongst these organizations and institutions. And fourth, a common agenda that refers to the collective agreements and mutual awareness amongst the organizations and actors with interest in the region. And finally, we have green path renewal, which is a type of path development that specifically refers to the adoption and development of technologies or practices that are, or at least try to be or pretend to be, environmentally friendly. Path development and path renewal in this case have been quite important to understand why certain industries and economic activities emerge in certain places and not in others, and what this body of literature, which is quite rich, says is that there are some conditions that influence this process to happen, this path development or renewal to happen. First, the developed institutions, the historically developed institutions. Second, the expectations and visions that shape the path, kind of the way where to go. And third, the availability and circulation of knowledge. So now I'm going to show you a little bit about the cases. I'm going to start with Lapland. Lapland, I don't know if there's somebody in the audience from Finland. That would be quite nice to help me to answer some questions myself as well. Lapland is the northernmost region of Finland and is also the region with the lowest population density in the EU. It is a region where the forest industry has been since the 19th century and today quite important for the regional economy. I think this data is from 2019, but the forest industry represents about 12% of the region GDP, and it's part of what is called the forest-based bioeconomy today. Lapland is in 53% of its territory is covered in forest land, and 27% of that forest land is for conservation. The rest is for exploitation in the forest industry. Now, as I said, Lapland's green policy is the forest-based bioeconomy combined with circular economy. So what this means, it means that they have a bet for using forest biomass to replace fossil fuels through modernizing the forest industry, also using innovation entrepreneurship, but also searching for other uses for forest, promoting local consumption and local production. So this green policy is implemented, as I said before, through a smart specialization, and it targets diverse actors. So all the big firms from the forest industry, for example, but also farmers, entrepreneurs, and even the villages. Lapland was one of the European regions that was one of the first to implement smart specialization, as early as having the preparative meetings in 2012. And during those meetings, the inclusion of a forest bioeconomy as a priority area was rather easy, so to speak. It was a decision that was quite straightforward because they reckoned they have the infrastructure, the knowledge, and the natural resources there to make it into a potential area of diversification. Now, the way this forest-based bioeconomy is organized within smart specialization, it's in two clusters. So the whole smart specialization strategy in Lapland, it's I'm not sure if they have updated it now today, but by 2019 and 20 earlier, there were 5 clusters. 2 of them refer to the forest bioeconomy. The first, it's called the Arctic Industry and Circular Economy Cluster, which basically targets the industrial side of the forest bioeconomy. And it targets the larger economic actors, promotes circular economy, it promotes the efficient use of natural resources and industrial symbiosis. The other cluster refers to the forest bioeconomy that is not necessarily industrial, and it's called the Arctic Smart Rural Communities. And they're more concerned with the municipalities and with the entrepreneurs' well-being and income. And they do strategies like promoting food production, local food production, or local consumption, or the decentralization of energy systems. There's an important thing to note here, and is that however organized it looks in the paper, in the documents that they have, this smart specialization strategy with 5 different clusters, in reality, there's a lot of collaboration between them, between these different clusters, but more importantly, there is a lot of roles that fall within the same person, because the population is quite low. So one person may hold different hats within the same strategy, and that has, in a way, influenced, especially public sector innovation. I'll come back to that. Now I'm going to pass to Värmland, which is where I live at the moment. The process and kind of the history in a way between both regions are quite similar, in the sense that the forest industry has been quite important in the history, in the economy of the regions, but also in the ways of living and their culture. Especially in Lapland, there is a quite strong Sami heritage that it's directly linked to the forests. And the forest industry continues to be quite important today in their economies. They represent a big part of the jobs available and a big part of the revenue that goes back to the region. It is also a region in Värmland. The territory is about 70% forest, and there's a lot of sawmills and some sort of diversification of the industry. Same as in Lapland, in Värmland, the forest bioeconomy is contained in the smart specialization strategy, which in this case is called Smart Specialization a la Värmland. And the same as in Lapland, the forest bioeconomy was already an established sector when smart specialization arrived, which make the decision of making it a top priority area also quite easy as they put it themselves. The forest bioeconomy in Lapland and in Värmland, it's a little different from Lapland in the sense that they're mostly focused in the industrial side of it. So they will talk more about innovation, about modernizing, about diversifying forest industry, and they will do things like funding innovation, funding research. The postdoc I did, for example, was funded by a cooperation between the region and the university. They will have a lot of work about regional branding. So they will attract more firms to either invest and established in the region or modernize the firms they already have. So yes, as I said, it's a little bit more on the industrial side if you want. I know I'm going a little bit fast about the details of the cases, so if you have any questions, please let me know. Now, the first argument I want to make here today is public sector innovation. It's in relation to public sector innovation, and what we found is that smart specialization has served as a platform to enhance public sector innovation in these regions, but it hasn't been enough to offset the power imbalances with larger economic actors. So to assess this, we looked at the type of strategies promoted by the regional councils, and we found that the strategies are innovative or not, depending on the type of actors that are involved and how adapted these strategies are to the local context. So for example, these strategies that are addressing the region's main economic actors in the forest bioeconomy, basically the large firms, and I must say at this point, we're talking of really big corporations and multinationals in some cases. Some of the strategies, they're not very innovative. They talk about providing innovation grants, facilitating and serving as the space for knowledge exchange, maybe as communicating the policy, coordinating the policy, but nothing beyond that. Indeed, these are strategies that kind of do the same that former innovation policies will do in the past, which is focus on funding and networking and on consultations, but not necessarily improving the local capacities. However, when it comes to work with other actors that are not so economically dominant, like the municipalities or entrepreneurs or farmers, these strategies are more grounded to the needs of these different actors, and they also become more innovative. So for example, in Lapland, the rural cluster, it has a very extensive communication and awareness program that includes individual visits and newspaper. They work very closely with the municipalities and entrepreneurs. They work a lot in producing reading and graphic pieces, like the one you can see in the slide, where they explain what the forest bioeconomy means for small-scale dairy production, for example, or berry picking. There are also lots of efforts to create local markets for products by either using public procurement or by reaching the restaurants and basically all the tourist industry, which is quite big also in Lapland, for them to buy the products that are being produced locally. So we found that public sector innovation is enhanced and enabled by institutional thickness, as was kind of anticipated before. And these regions, we'll say again, are institutionally thick, but they are institutionally thick and capable in their own very way as well. Their institutional thickness and capabilities are quite peculiar because of the population density, pretty much. So I'm going to go to that point. When we started looking at the factors of institutional thickness and comparing them or looking at them under the lenses of the regions and the conditions, we find that there is indeed a strong organizational presence, but that is reflected not so much in the number of actors or agencies. Actually, the regional governments are not too big. And like there are universities in each one of the places. Farmland has one university, Lapland has two, and some research centers and firms. But it's not so much about the number, but the willingness they had to adapt that new policy to the local conditions. Now, this willingness is also attached to the fact that that policy they wanted to adapt was quite convenient in reality for what they wanted or for what they already had. I'm talking about a forest bioeconomy that uses an existing infrastructure that relies on access to the raw material that is quite abundant in both the regions and etc. So there is a strong organizational presence that is mostly seen in how these actors are willing to adapt a policy that seems quite convenient for their interests. Now, there are high levels of interactions as well. Again, this is not measured in how many people, how many meetings, or etc., but more explained by the fact that the community of practitioners is rather small, which have kind of facilitated the collaborations, the agreements, and the decision making. And this has been really important to create a common agenda, which is the third factor. So the smart specialization part of it, anyway, it's built around the forest bioeconomy. It is appealing to the contextual conditions that are being crucial for the regional economy, but also for the everyday life, which it makes easy for the practitioners, the regional governments, to try to reach a common agreement on where they want to go, even if the actors may have different interests. So these three factors are factors that enable public sector innovation. Then the last one, the structure of domination, is a factor that we found limited. And as I said before, it depends whether we're talking about the strategies that are targeting the dominant economic actors, then public sector innovation is quite diminished. But if it targets other actors, then public sector innovation is enhanced as well. I'm going to go to the second argument here. And it refers to green growth, green policies, and the effect on green path renewal. What we wanted to look at here is whether a smart specialization is in a way influencing or not green path renewal, and we found that it does actually influence it. So smart specialization has served as a process, as an iterative process, but because of the way it is designed, where there's a lot of meetings and workshops, and especially in the process that's called the entrepreneurial discovery process, where all the actors, or most of them, will try to reach an agreement towards the policy. So it serves as this iterative process where, with two important effects in green path renewal. First, it has served to mobilize some crucial resources. Second, it has served to set a common agenda around a shared imagined future, which is of the forest bioeconomy. So these regions have a series of preconditions that, when they are mobilized outside the actors and the skills that hold them, mostly the firms, but some others as well, this can influence green path renewal. These preconditions are an existing culture of collaboration, knowledge about forestry, about the use of the forest, about what are the sustainable needs of different areas or places within the region, what are the economic growth needs and potentials, what's the infrastructure, and the access to raw material. So I won't have a lot of time to stop in each one of them, but I'm going to give an example regarding the mobilization of knowledge. So the cases show that, of course, the knowledge that is held by the firms is very important for green renewal. But there's another type of knowledge that is held elsewhere that is very important when we're talking about green transformations. It's knowledge that may be lay in civil society or researchers or part of other actors outside of the firms that can tell us about how to use the forest, how to manage the forest, and etc. What's been helpful from a smart specialization for these regions is that part of it is participatory process, and the process has helped to include all these different views on what the forest bioeconomy should be. And this is important because it can help also to highlight what are the needs and the sustainable solutions that some places will require, and perhaps to impact the knowledge to address those needs. So this said in other words, what smart specialization has done is that it has helped to pinpoint what are the needs and the challenges that innovation is expected to solve. Another distinctive factor where we're talking about knowledge for green path renewal is the knowledge contained about forest management, as I said. And this might be a little bit too particular for the cases, yet it's very important to the discussions around sustainability, because this is a type of knowledge that can lead to innovation, but it may not lead necessarily to growth or to profit, but to achieve the sustainability goals of the bioeconomy, which is quite contested anyway. So all of these pre-existing conditions can shape path renewal. However, green path renewal is a process where multiple actors are participating, and those actors hold different interests. Then it comes the role of a shared imagined future, or an expectation or a vision that becomes important for decision making. The forest, that imagined future is the imagined future as proposed by the forest bioeconomy, which is proposing a route for economic growth in rural areas by replacing fossil fuels with forest biomass to address climate change while stimulating economic growth, rural development, and the modernization of the forest industry. So that's the future they're proposing. And these narratives are endorsing certain visions that are later translated into policies, strategies, and institutional arrangements that try to portray a solution for the, say, classic problems of sparsely populated areas like unemployment, lack of industrial modernization, and the population. So these are visions that did not come to existence with smart specialization, of course. But what it has done is that smart specialization has articulated all these visions and otherwise efforts that were otherwise isolated. It has helped them the practitioners to gather them under the same umbrella of expectations and has given it a common language. And this has facilitated agreements and collaborations towards realizing that imagined future. Then I'm going to my last slide now. That's the conclusion. So at the end, what's the role of smart specialization here? And it has been to instrumentalize the bioeconomy at the regional and local level, so it can be integrated within the regional development strategies. An advantage of framing the bioeconomy within smart specialization is that the language of smart specialization, which is collaboration, clusters, symbiosis, innovation, economic growth, etc., is quite appealing to the local governments and the private sector. So it makes it easier for them to receive it and translate it in a way. The first argument I expose here refers to what enables and what limits public sector innovation for green policies in sparsely populated regions. And we found that an important part of it is determined by institutional thickness, which is in any way quite peculiar for the sparsely populated regions I've been talking about here. These regions show that specificities, lacking formal institutions, trust and collaborations, and a very strong culture of collaboration that existed from way before has enhanced public sector innovation. However, the power imbalances with the main or more dominant economic actors remains. And second and last, the second argument refers to the influence of smart specialization in green path renewal. Indeed, smart specialization has served as a mechanism that mobilizes pre-existing conditions to reach a common agenda about an imagined future, which ultimately can influence green path renewal. Those pre-existing conditions are a strong culture of collaboration, knowledge, infrastructure, access to natural resources, and that shared imagination is that one of a forest bioeconomy that replaces fossil fuels while promoting economic growth. And yeah, and that's me. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Diana. That was really fascinating. A couple of case studies that certainly I don't hear about every day. So it was very informative to get to know them a bit. And also to see your findings on the S3 processes and the spotlight that your presentation has put on the importance of local capacity and creating innovation with all kinds of local actors. I think this is a good time to open the discussion to our audience. So for anyone with any immediate questions to Diana, please, please ask them by turning on your camera and just speak. I think we are a relatively small group, so we can do it just like that. Maybe there's enough food for thought and you need to digest it a little bit. I can see Bill with his hand up. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I'm sorry, I missed the start of the presentation. You may have covered this, but I'm interested in how you established a level of collaboration that you probably needed to take some of these principles through to implementation, and to what extent that depended on the institutional structures locally, the the scale of local government, and indeed sub local government, and how they work together. It may be a preconception on my part, but the impression I have is that people who are living and working in very, very remote areas, remote rural areas, tend to be very individual, and not, they do a lot for themselves, and therefore they're not necessarily easily attuned to working collaboratively. And I just wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit about how that came together to create that sense of collaboration and that shared perception that there is a shared interest in this shared imagined future.
Should I answer straight away, or do we get a few more questions? I can answer.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, right. Yeah, thanks, Will, for that question. These regions are quite atypical in the sense that, despite being sparsely populated, have quite small number of people living there. There is quite strong institutional capacities, at least when compared to the European rankings, and they normally will rank above average anyway in institutional capacities. But they also have a quite interesting feature, is that there is an existing culture of collaboration in place that has been there for many years in the long, and it might continue to be in the long term. As the interviews would put it, it was very easy. It was very easy for them to reach the agreements because they were used to work with each other, because they will know each other. And maybe the collaborations could happen a little bit more informally, in a way that it wouldn't be needed to create a whole framework or a whole event or a conference or whatsoever, but you very easily reach one of the cluster managers or one entrepreneur or the manager of a plant or of Stora Enso or whatever, quite easily have a chat and maybe start those more informal ways of getting things moving. So in this case, these are regions whose actors are used to collaborate, and not only with the public sector, but within the public sector, between the public sector and the private sector, and within the private sector itself. So I'm going to give you an example of Farmland. Here, the forest bioeconomy, as I said, exists from way before. It's not that it came when the European Union came with this strategy. Maybe it gave it the name. But then there is a cluster organization that gathers, I'm going to say 90 different firms, but I'm not completely sure of the name, but it's a good number of firms that work in relation to the forest industry, and they're called Paper Province. Paper Province has been collaborating a lot with Karlstad University, for example, for doing research, and it has been collaborating a lot with the regional authorities to fund research and to fund entrepreneurship, and maybe to help startups going on around the use of forests and things like that. So it did exist, and it made it easier. It happened from before, say, a little bit more informally. What Smart Specialization has done is that it has kind of gathered them together, and all these different efforts, all these different conversations, agreements, previous projects, etc., they're under the same umbrella, and it kind of helps the regional government to lead it a little bit better. But yeah, that's very briefly a little bit how it happened.
Okay, thank you, Diana, and thank you, Bill, for eliciting this very thorough answer. Thanks. I saw Stefan and Heidi putting on their cameras. Does that mean you want to ask something? You want to go first, Stefan?
Okay, thanks. I didn't want to. Yeah, first, I thought, just coming back to what Bill said, I was interesting, and you made the point that maybe in those sparsely populated areas, it's more difficult to engage people. you might well be right about this, but I always assumed this would be easier because you think this there's more connection to, you have probably fewer incomers. Everybody living there is more rooted in the community, and there's more an attachment to the local area and all this. There's obviously the challenge of the sparse population, and it's just pretty empty and difficult to communicate directly is a practical challenge. But I thought there would be more commitment. But I don't know. That's not my point. I'm myself and Nelly, who's also here, Nelly Georgieva, we are both in EPRC as well, and we are working in a Horizon project on the bioeconomy. And one of the 5 case study regions we have is in Latvia, and it's on forestry. So it's about not just the bioeconomy itself, it's about strategy development and capacity building. And our task mainly is capacity building for strategy development in the bioeconomy. And what and I can send you a link, and maybe the Latvian case, I don't know how relevant that is or well known. We work together with the Institute for Forestry. And it's obviously not as sparsely populated, I would imagine. And I've just checked; it's just as far south as southern Sweden, so it's maybe a bit different. But what I was wondering is smart specialization. We were trying to push, or we said, okay, what we're doing here is basically a smart specialization process in those 5 regions in some form. But then we kind of thought maybe it isn't, because it is so predefined on the bioeconomy already. So you don't need to smartly define your specializing anymore, because it's already narrowed down. So if you want to do smart specialization, you need to have it open and say, and if you find out through the process that maybe it's other areas, that would be, but this was the case. So it was already clear what our specialization is. In Latvia, it's forestry. In northern Poland on the coast, it's about fish waste basically. So it was interesting. How did you, or how can you, how is smart specialization working in a predefined area? Is it still smart?
I think that what they have done here, they have followed the recipe quite closely to what it is, I suppose. So what the strategy they apply, smart specialization strategy they apply, it says you choose the areas where you want to diversify, or where not so much where you want to, but where you have potential for, and focus on them. And that's literally what they have done. And that's why the forest bioeconomy, it was rather easy for them to choose, because precisely as your case, it was already there. So it didn't need a lot of extra efforts or extra investments or a lot of extra work, in a sense, to make it into a top priority. Now, what has happened is that, well, about your question, should smart specialization should keep it open? I actually don't know. I feel like here it has worked very well, because they have done the task really well as it was, requested, in a sense. But like, you choose where you're good at and keep working on that. But that might mean that there are some of the areas that might be overlooked or might be pushed because there's too much of focus on the forest industry in this case. And I do see problems with that, because a very powerful and dominant industry that was in place, it continues to be, and it not only continues to be, but now it has a lot of, not that it didn't have public support before, but now it has the whole apparatus kind of working towards greening it and modernizing it. And some people might be very critical about what they're doing, and they will call the forest bioeconomy more a greenwash of what the forest industry do, or a way to fix their quite controversial sustainable credentials. So I do see the value of keeping it open in that sense. Now, what has happened, and I think has been good for these regions, is that however dominant these other actors were, say Paper Province that I talked about before, that gathers the forest industry in a way. Paper Province used to be the most important actor within the forest bioeconomy, meaning it continues to be the firms, the ones that are the most important. In important in terms of defining the agenda, important in terms of defining the investments and these kind of things. Whereas with smart specialization, then the regional governments get a little bit more of hold on the policy and on the strategy and on the forest bioeconomy. So they may have a little bit of a stronger say. It will give them more, maybe more tools to reach agreements in areas that the firms might not be much interested in. In Lapland, for example, they will work with the firms, and Lapland actually just quite recently got approved a plan to build what it will be the biggest sawmill in the Northern Hemisphere. So we're talking of billions of euros of investments that no regional government of these areas could make anyway. But what the regional government can do with smart specialization is they can say, okay, you do that, but we care about this other part. We have this forest and we have these uses of the forest that we need for ecotourism, that we need for farming, that we need for to preserve the Sami heritage, for example, and then they will get hold of that and push it within the same agenda. So so I don't know if this answers your question or whether it's good to keep it open or not, but I do see how it plays in both ways, I suppose.
Okay, thank you both. Any follow-up, Stefan or Nelly, or does that suit? Yeah, good. Anyone else having a question for Diana?
May I actually have a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just trying to understand the cases a bit better from what you're saying. I understand that it's quite important to have this initial driver, as you were saying. There was a big firm, a big company, multinational. So it is important. I mean, to what extent do you think it is important to have this big firm that, you know, it has resources, it has the knowledge, it has the maybe more international connections, markets, etc., to actually drive that process, and then, you know, the rest would slowly follow and join that.
Right. I think the answer will depend on where you position yourself, I suppose. If you position, which is I tend to do myself, in a green transformation that does not necessarily need economic growth, or rather will be in opposition to economic growth, and talking of a transformation that is wider. It's not only about greening the industries and making it cleaner, but also including other actors, changing our ways of consuming, for example, and things like that. Then the firms could be a little bit of the bad guy here, in the sense that in these regions, these are places where these firms are perhaps too powerful, in the sense that they provide a lot of revenue for the regions and a lot of jobs. And then a lot of smart specialization, and not only smart specialization, but regional policies, they will be geared towards how to keep these firms here, how to or make more of them to come, and what kind of leverage are they having, what kind of things are we going to give them more tax breaks. Here, for example, they have subsidies for energy, and there's like a whole process of regional branding. So it depends on where you stand. So if you stand in a more critical point of view, then you'll say it's problematic. They are needed, but it's problematic. If you stand from a point of view where the green transformation and green growth can actually happen, and it's the route to go, then these firms become really important. Now, these regions also face a problem, is that these big plants, these big sawmills, they have the production sites here, but they do not take their decisions here. Their decision center would be in Stockholm, in Helsinki, or I don't know, anywhere else. So they just take decisions elsewhere and they're applied here. And in that sense, that poses a quite a different challenge for what they want, and it will shape the role they can play, because they're just here, say, utilizing the wood, converting it, selling it, but not taking decisions on how to be more sustainable or how to branch out, how to take some spin-offs, and etc. So, yeah, I'm sorry that I can't give a straight answer either.
No, I think you're right, and indeed, I think where I was coming from is rather, regions that might not have that history, in the forestry or bioeconomy. So, yeah, but I think you're fully right. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Nelly and Diana again. Does anyone else have a question? I think we're having about 5 minutes left, so maybe one or two questions. If not, I think I have one myself actually, which is a bit more like future oriented, perhaps. So could be a good way to end the session. This mainly relates to the sustainability implications of your research object, which is the forest-based bioeconomy, and sort of the different conceptualizations of sustainability and well-being. Also, previous EPRC seminars have discussed that, like the sort of economic, social, ecological dimensions of that. And it seems to me that the ecological part gets a lot of maybe weight or attention in the case of the regions that you have discussed. Would you say, or yeah, so maybe the first part of the question would be, would you say that is true, that there is more or less an equal weight to the ecological part attached by the strategies and the actors that you've talked to? And maybe also what the sort of future of the expansion maybe of the bioeconomy is when regions rely a lot, as you said, maybe was it 12% or 20% on that as a sector. How sustainable is that? I mean, I can imagine there is a limit to expanding the number of trees cut in very simple terms, but it's probably more complicated than that. But how do you see this, as a towards the future?
I'm going to start with the last bit, because you're absolutely right. It should be more, the sustainability credentials should be, or measure should be more complicated than comparing how many trees are harvested against how much forests are growing, which is literally the main measure that's being used now, and that's really concerning. First, the forests do grow, but they grow slowly, especially up here. A tree takes 100 years to grow, so it's not that it's such a fast renewable resource like that as well. And there should be a limit to expanding. And I mean, one of the big areas here, for example, in Värmland, in the forest bioeconomy of Farmland, is the packaging. So replacing plastic by paper packaging for liquids, and etc. And it's quite great. And I've seen it myself in my recycle bin, for example, for the last 2 years, how it has been changing, and how my plastic bit of the recycle, it's much smaller than it was, whereas the paper side of the recycling is quite big. And yeah, that's great. Also, it makes you question, do we need to keep using single-use products? Because whether they're plastic or paper, it should be something more problematic around that. So that's part of the main critiques to the bioeconomy, indeed. How the sustainability is being measured, and what does it mean in terms of the limits? How do we live within planetary limits? And that's a question that has not been asked in the bioeconomy, at least not in these cases. I don't know if in the Latvian cases, Anneli and Stefan have been working, they address these questions. And now, whether there's equal weight to sustainability, well-being, and economic growth, no, there isn't. All the narratives do tend to use sustainability a lot. However, smart specialization, indeed, it's mostly a regional economic growth or regional development strategy in the end. And the tools it gives, they refer more to how to keep on growing, how to keep producing and increasing the economic revenue, more than how to make that production sustainable. So even if the narratives continue, they tend to be more and more, and the practitioners are very aware of, we need to be more sustainable, we need to change this and that and that and that. In reality, how things are applied, I think anyway, the economic growth continues to be more important. And actually, I'm looking for another paper that came out of this project that reflects on those narratives. So if I find it in the next 30 seconds, I can share it in the chat. Otherwise, I can just send it to you.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for that answer also. And yeah, you can still also send us the paper so we can include it in the final email after the event to our participants. And yeah, I think your point also about the packaging was very newsworthy actually and actual, when I think there was a recently reported shortage of carton and paper because of the increased usage of them for packaging, well, related to the lot of packages we order in these times, of course, and that get all sent out one by one instead of in bulk in shops. So that just came to mind. Yeah. So we're coming. I see you have posted the link, which is great.
Yeah, I found it.
Great, thanks. And also Stefan has posted a link to the Be Rural project that he just mentioned. So with that, I think we've come to the hour. I think it's been a very fascinating topic to explore. Well, first of all, smart specialization and how regions can pursue their development in a hopefully sustainable way, and also highlighting these particular cases, which I found fascinating, and hopefully the audience as well. So thanks for being with us today, to everyone, to Diana and to the audience. Our webinar series will hopefully be back in September with more discussions on regional policy, regional development and sustainability. So please contact us if you want to register for our mailing list, if you're not on it already, and you'll be kept up to date with future events. And likewise, we hope to see you again, and also we wish you a very good summer, which is not so far away now. So thanks everyone, and see you later.
Thanks everyone, it was really nice to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.